Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today to spend the next hour talking about youth well-being. Before I get started, if we will go through a little housekeeping. If we can move to the next slide. Perfect. A note that this event is being recorded and it will be posted afterwards on our events page at urban.org. You can hide the captions or adjust the settings with the live transcript button. We have posted a document with the bios on the events page, so we won't be spending much time today on detailed bios of our amazing speakers. All of you are muted given the size of the crowd, but we really encourage you to type your questions and comments as you go along in the Q&A box that we will review. My colleagues from communications will send you a survey, we'll post a survey and send you one at the end of the event, and we'd appreciate if you'd fill that out. It really helps us plan for future events. And finally, engage with us online on social media using #live@urban. Before we go through today's agenda, I wanted to give a minute to our friends at the Annie E. Casey Foundation to let you know their perspective on youth well-being. Kimberly Spring, the Director of Research and Evaluation, and Florencia Gutierrez, Senior Associate, have really been thought partners along the way as we've been developing these publications, and we appreciate their expertise and support over the last years. So I'll turn it over to Kimberly and
Thank you, Kathy. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kimberly Spring, as Kathy mentioned, and I'm here with my colleague Flo. We want to take a moment to welcome you to the webinar. We're really happy to have all of you join and want to thank Urban for the remarkable work that they've done in synthesizing the field of youth well-being measurement. This project really initially emerged from some conversations that Flo and I and some others at Casey were having around as we thought about the various ways that well-being is conceptualized across multiple sectors. It's a complex concept and there's many different definitions and ways of measuring it. And we saw a need to try to make sense of all of that complexity. We also wanted to better understand how the field has been looking to strengthen how we measure well-being, particularly in seeking a range of measures that can be more asset focused, that can speak to the extent to which environments and systems create the conditions for well-being for young people, and also to think about measures that are culturally and generationally responsive to young people. And with the idea that if we could understand this better, we can also think about how to support the development and use of emerging measures that are available and reliable and can help give us a fuller picture of well-being. And I think what I find is that I think Urban has done an excellent job of scanning the field of measures and providing a coherent and useful framework that's organized into 8 domains. And in the process, they've also offered some thoughtful recommendations for how to select and interpret well-being measures in ways that we as a field can continue to improve how we think about and measure well-being. And from my perspective, I think one of the benefits of having these 8 domains is that they not only provide a framework for us to be able to talk about and clarify different concepts of well-being, but also to begin to see how these domains are interconnected and to think about how systems and structures are touching all of these various domains. And I'll also say that we're very interested in hearing from all of you about the usefulness of the products that Urban has released, how this framework intersects maybe with frameworks that you already are using, and what we as a field need or could do moving forward. And I'd like to just pass it over to Flo to speak more about this, particularly in a relationship to Kids Count.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with you all today. Hopefully someday we'll meet many of you in person. I know I have lots of friends on the call right now. So my name is Florencia Gutierrez. I'm a senior associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I lead the Kids Count data work for the organization. Now, over the past 3 decades, the foundation has measured and tracked the well-being of kids through our Kids Count data book. The first data book that we released was released back in 1990. This was during a time when data to measure the well-being of kids was very limited, and the data that was available was very hard to access, which meant we didn't really have a sense of how children were faring or what well-being meant. Since then, how children and youth well-being is conceptualized and defined has changed and broadened. There's a lot more data that has become available to tell the story of how children are faring. And more young people's views and ideas are influencing definitions and providing context on what well-being looks like to them. And it's something that we're being very intentional about as we think about this work at the foundation. Now, things clearly are changing. I think the pandemic really shed light on issues that in many of our minds were back in the shadows, issues that impact the well-being of children, like mental health. Clearly, it impacts their well-being, was really brought into the light with the pandemic. Now, our hope is that these resources, the resources that you learn about today, will help advance the work that you all are doing, will advance the field, and really provide avenues to augment and broaden the work that we all are doing in this space. Now, I know that here at the foundation, we'll be using what we learned from these resources. That library of data sources that Urban compiled is gold, at least to me, maybe because I'm data geeky like that. But lots of great information. And I know that we'll take that information along with what we're doing with the Kids Count Index and Indicator Review to really think about how we conceptualize child well-being and how we broaden what the work that we're currently doing. So really hope that you find these resources useful. And with that, I'll pass it along to Kathy to go through the agenda.
Thanks, Flo. And Kimberly, that was great. We could move to the next slide. That would be helpful. Whoops. I think we're one up. Exactly, perfect. Here's our plan for how we're going to spend the time together over the next hour. Amelia will share some highlights of Urban's general body of work on young people and describe the suite of publications and products that Flo referred to along the way. She'll also cover some of the sort of big picture themes that we found and introduce you to our 8 domains of youth well-being that you'll become more familiar with. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of the domains one by one, but my colleague Hannah will walk through economic stability and how we were thinking and what we found in the literature around that area. Then we're very grateful to have Juan Martinez Pineda from Aspen Institute with us to share his information about his youth-led project on well-being, which really complements ours really well, and wrap up with takeaways and action items. So before we get started and I turn it over to Amelia, we wanted to get to know a little bit more about who's in the room. Haley, if you can launch the poll about different roles, that would be helpful. So it should have popped up on your screen, you might play many, you might have multiple hats, but choose one so we can have a sense of what you might be interested in as we go along. Great. I know some of you may not be able to, may not be at your clicker to choose. Haley, you can show the results whenever you'd like. Oh, I love that there's such a mix. Advocates, service providers, we have a lot of researchers, fellow researchers, and I'm super curious about other too. So I appreciate all of you here, and a special welcome to the young leaders and researchers too. So I will turn it over to Amelia to start on the substance of our presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Really excited to be here and share more about our work with you all. We want to start out just with highlighting some of our larger bodies of work at Urban that relate to youth. We have a really broad range of work intersecting with various policy areas. And the first that we want to highlight is a project called Youth and the Safety Net, which is a multi-year project supported by the Casey Foundation that examines barriers and opportunities to effectively serving young people among major federal safety net programs and also refundable tax credits. And the second body of work is one that we've grown over several decades on transition age youth with a history of foster care, largely examining federal programs that are administered by the Children's Bureau and how those intersect with other systems and programs. But we've also received support from foundations and state and local government to conduct program evaluations in that space as well. And finally, the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, coordinated by Urban, is a network of groups in 32 places around the country that helps communities use data to shape strategies and investments. So all those neighborhoods are places where people can thrive. And several of the local partners collaborate with youth on data and research. And then now I'd like to share a little bit about the project that we will be diving into in more detail today, which is focused on youth well-being. And through that project, we've identified and refined domains of youth well-being via a stepwise process. And that process, oops, I think I might have. Sorry, I think that we might be missing a slide here, but we've identified domains via a stepwise process that started with a literature review, an initial literature scan, and then some expert interviews with an emphasis on speaking with people who do participatory work with young people. And then we dove more into in-depth literature scan to fill in some of the gaps. And okay, and then this resulted in several products, which are highlighted on this slide. Thank you, Kathy, which included a report dealing with these topics in depth, a fact sheet that provided an overview of domains, a blog with cross-cutting themes, a brief guide that poses questions to help users think through how to use indicators and data on youth well-being, and a data catalog that includes descriptions and links to national data sources on youth. And we'll have links to these products on the events page on urban.org. And then some of the cross-cutting themes that emerge from the work that I just kind of laid out are, first of all, that including young people and developing concepts and measures is really important so that data reflect their diverse experiences. And then also that centering racial equity in developing concepts and measures is also critical. Focusing on disaggregating data to show distinctions in the experiences of different groups is also, of course, important. As well as looking beyond individual behaviors towards structural conditions that affect well-being. And then finally, focusing on young people's assets and strengths in contrast to the more traditional focus in the field on deficits. And also say that we want to acknowledge that these aren't new concepts or ideas that we invented, but we know we're excited, about others in the field developing and promoting these ideas and themes in creative ways and to be a part of that process. And so through that process that I laid out, we identified 8 domains of youth well-being through a literature scan and interviews. And those domains include ones that are commonly associated with youth well-being across the field, like physical health and education, and have well-known national data sources. And we often see those included in youth indicator projects. But others may be ones that you hadn't thought about before, or for example, the importance of community or sense of purpose, and those might have fewer nationally available sources. And we identified traditional as well as emergent concepts and gaps we observed in our research for each domain. So for example, traditional ways to define physical health include the presence or absence of disease and individual behaviors that promote or harm health. And these traditional concepts are often important, but insufficient to fully capture that concept. And more expansive or emergent measures frame physical health as what one has or lacks. So for example, the availability of a balanced diet for a young person. And gaps in the literature on this domain include approaches to measuring young people's feelings about their health and their own bodies. And we feel like these ideas can provide nuance, additions, and critical context for the commonly used concepts. We hope these ideas will encourage the youth field to expand its understanding of aspects of well-being and use those more emergent concepts within the domains. And now I will turn things over to Hannah, who will dive more into one of those domains in a little more detail.
Awesome. Thank you, Amelia. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We're very grateful. Like Amelia said, I'm going to be talking about our economic stability domain, starting here with what we've called the traditional measures. So the most classic measure of economic well-being is income, which we've included here. This can be where a household falls in relation to the federal poverty level, or where a household is relative to the area's median household income. And the next one is the ability to meet basic needs, within which we've included food security and housing security. Family savings, debt, and net wealth, including home equity, is another measure. And this includes student loans, which can have a large impact on someone's present economic well-being and can be a large barrier to wealth building. Another very classic measure is employment status, and some more nuanced measures capture consistency of employment and the in-kind benefits that can come from employment, like health insurance. And then lastly, we've included factors that facilitate work, such as access to reliable transit, availability of jobs in an area, and for young people who are parenting, childcare. And then here's an example of a project that showcases these more traditional indicators. This is the Aspen Institute's Debt in America project that showcases statistics on debt and credit for communities across the United States. And you'll see some of those measures and statistics on the left side there. And there are some more expansive definitions and understandings of economic well-being. And one of them is the ability for young people to make choices over their financial lives and to feel a sense of security, such as having control over day-to-day finances. Another is benchmarking economic well-being to higher standards of living than just the ability to meet basic needs, one that values a greater thriving for all people. Poverty level has been recognized as being low and inadequate for many people. Another one is the critique of capitalism and its extractive nature and how it constantly makes people feel like they need to be productive. The Aspen report, which one we'll discuss, talks about being free from the pressures of growing up in a capitalistic society. And lastly, another emergent concept is the quality of employment. This can include concepts such as work-life balance, employment security, a workplace free of harassment, the social value of employment, and having work that's meaningful to someone. And an example of these emergent measures that I just talked about is Aspen Institute's Good Jobs, a Working Definition. It is about the quality of employment, and they highlight 3 areas, which you can see here. Under those areas includes concepts such as stable and sustaining pay and benefits, advancement practices that are transparent and support belonging, and the ability to improve the workplace through collective action or participatory management. And these concepts are less easily measured than some of the traditional measures that I just talked about. Awesome. Well, we are so happy to be able to pair our findings with hearing about the Aspen Project on Wellbeing that has young people at the forefront of defining and measuring well-being. Before turning it over to Juan, we'd like to know about your experience with engaging young people, and we have a quick poll for you. Cool. So that should have popped up for you. But yeah, how often do you involve young people directly in shaping your work? And Bailey, we can show the results whenever it seems like we have enough people. Awesome. So it looks like we have a good mix of people who, I love seeing that people always or frequently engage young people, and a lot of people who would like to in the future. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking a little bit of time to fill that out. And we're really grateful to be here today with Juan Martinez Pineda from the Aspen Institute, and I am going to pass it over to him now.
Thanks, Hannah. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited for the next couple of minutes together. My name is Juan Martinez Pineda. Skarupe Yadatunalaya Juan Chinje Alicia Chinje Isabel. I just greeted you in my native language dialect of the Zapoteca people, the Cloud people from the Istmo de Tehuantepec, Oaxaca. So if you've ever had mole or chocolate, that's our people. I am the Deputy Director at Forum for Community Solutions and Director of Fresh Tracks. Fresh Tracks was established to as a cross-cultural revolution led by youth to embrace the healing power of culture and the outdoors. We are housed at the Forum for Community Solutions at the Aspen Institute, and I am here today to talk to you about the Youth and Young Adult Wellbeing Project. We got a lot of good information. I'm just gonna do this real quick. I am a physical person, so why don't we take 5 quick seconds, like shake it out, give me like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like give me some movement here. And we will dive into a practice that I credit our partners at the Network for Children of African Descent, NCAT, with establishing this practice early on for us. If you know this, don't blurt it out in the chat box. But this is an exercise about used in the anthropology sector more than anything else. And it has to deal with the Nasarima and how we use language to propose and communicate data and information and research. Quick minute here, take a minute and visualize the next couple of statements that I'm going to share with you, and then take a guess about what culture this is and what do you see. All right, so here we go. The Nasarima are obsessed with the body, which they believe is intrinsically ugly and prone to debility and disease. Each Nasarima household has a shrine or sometimes several shrines in which private rituals are performed to mitigate what they see as ever-present and pervasive threats to their bodies. Various charms provided by medicine men are ingested, and they perform several rites of ablution throughout the day using a special purified water secured for the main water temple of the community. The Nasarima have started building very large temples that contain rows and rows of various body torture devices, which they use to punish their own bodies. The devices are designed to tear and damage muscles, sometimes causing them to swell. Others are designed to completely exhaust the body and use all of its energy so that the body starts to consume itself in order to provide energy for movement. Take a moment, think about where this culture could be present as I've read it. And Nasarima is just American spelled backwards. This was, you can find this exercise online, Growing Up Among Nasarima. Again, credit to the Network for Children of African Descent for establishing this practice. But it really emphasized who gets to tell the story, who gets to control the data, who gets to narrate it, and who gets to express it. Again, similar to the Urban Institute, this project of the Youth and Young Adult Wellbeing Measure project is supported with by the Annie Casey Foundation. Special shout out to Flo and the whole team there, as well as Cynthia Weaver at the Evidence-Based Practice Group, who has been a champion, a partner, a friend, and a mentor along this way as we continue to do this. This is our working definition of well-being, so take a moment to take it in. I'm not going to read the whole definition. As you're reading the definition, I will invite you to center what the young people have held me accountable to, making sure that anytime someone sees the definition that we are proposing, that we also acknowledge that a very unique finding in this, and that is that definition of well-being is not static, it is dynamic. It is ever-changing, ever-flowing. At any one given point, this definition of well-being could change. This is our working definition within the group. And this definition was established in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of young people who were entering school or work for the first time, and that shifted radically for many of them. And so this definition of well-being is true for them. And what they have held me accountable to making sure that I communicate with is that this definition of well-being should not be held against any other young person's lived experience, that this is true for us for now, and that we will use this as a working definition, as a living document, and a dynamic definition of well-being. So again, credit to our young researchers and experts who have created this definition for our purpose here and now for this project. We started with these two questions in our project. How does culture, values, and circumstance nurture the well-being for youth and young adults? Who gets to define well-being and measure it? At Fresh Tracks, we centered this statement made up of one, a grassroots community organizing mantra, which is those closest to the pain must be closest to the power. And then another one by my great colleague, Nanette, who is our data partner at the Aspen Institute. Those with the data have the power. So we always center those two general statements and credit them with centering the work that we do. In response, our goal has been to support the development in an innovative well-being and healing measure developed by youth and young adults of color that incorporates a lived experience through a participatory action research process. Before diving into some of our findings, the construct of our team, how we've made up our community is built on this ecosystem of adult allies and researchers and experts. There's 3 groups made up by cultural affinity groups. Each one of those 3 cultural affinity groups houses these 3 partners. There's a youth and young adult design team. This is our core team. These are the decision makers, anytime that we have a crux in the road about the direction of the project, this is the group that makes that decision. Our research navigators are field experts who have experience with research. And then our peer research mentors are other young youth and young adults who may not necessarily be in the core team, but have experience doing research and can serve as a reference point for and support for our adult design team. So in 2020, we launched the project, and phase 1 out of a 3-phase project is how we are framing the overall project. Phase 1 is really built around finding the definition of well-being and how do we articulate that. What the group has found is that there's 7 areas of youth well-being. And you can see how we aggregated some of these. Each color, different colors is a keyword associated with an affinity group. And right now it looks very, very sporadic, but at the core element of it, what we found was the 7 key areas of youth well-being. Similar to what Urban Institute has found, we are crosswalking and finding a lot of overlap here. A healthy environment, cultural connections, financial stability, inclusion and safety, community self-efficacy, healthy, caring relationships with family members, friends, and mentors, and good mental health are the 7 key areas. This is another way of seeing that as well. So this is our one of the other ways that we've articulated and synthesized some of those areas. And then we have another way of looking at that, which is goes back to our centering the healing power of culture in the outdoors, right? So common components of well-being, balance, and peace, healing from trauma. These are those are terms pulled from our definition of well-being, and then the 7 elements and 7 elements / areas that make up well-being. Our story of wellness, if you're familiar with YPAR, you're familiar with this. It is very much established under that. YPAR is a system that embraces young people not as counsel or advocates, but really embraces their leadership as architects, leaders, authors, and meaning making of the data. And so we inquire, so this was phase 1 essentially of our project. We're understanding, this is where we're currently at. We're aggregating all of that data, understanding it, and we're synthesizing it. And we're going to be moving into the action part, which is probably the most critical part of youth participatory action research. You can't have any of that without leading towards action. And that is, again, the big responsibility for us on this project is to be focused on that action. And so the action component of this will be an open source tool that helps us to understand and define well-being, and how critical it is for young people to thrive as adults. The more we know about how to help our young people get to that state, the brighter our future will be. Can't go on without saying thanks to our partners. Too many to name here, but these are some of our core partners, with a big shout out to the Annie Casey Foundation for helping catalyze this and really believing in us from conception to where we are today. I will invite you all to stay tuned, because we're going to be rolling out pilots of the tool this year for each one of the affinity groups. And we'll happily invite anyone out there who's interested in joining our network of partners to join us for that. If you want to get in touch, please feel free to do so. Here's some of the information there that we will share as well too via another outlet. And I'll turn it back over to our team over at Urban.
Next one. There's through your slides. Thanks so much for the description and update of your project. We were very excited as soon as we found out about it, and we can't wait to see the progress and products and learning that comes out of it. So we have some takeaways and suggested action items to go, but we also wanted to just pause for a minute and acknowledge the original motivation why we got into this work, and why we assume most of you are here today to really think about how each of us in our role can support young people thriving. And before moving to our final section, we'd like to hear how you're hoping to learn how you're hoping to use what you will learn from our publications and from Juan's eventual product. If Haley can share the poll. I think we're all interested in obviously putting these publications to good use. So wanted to know what you were your eventual action plan for the materials. Just one more second. A really good breakdown. We love to see both our work feeding into our fellow researcher and policy, but also into practitioner and getting this out to young people for their opinions too. So thank you very much for participating in the poll. I'm going to close that down now. So just coming back to bring up some of the major points that you heard, I think through from the Casey welcome, through Amelia and Hannah, and on through Juan's presentation. One is to really emphasize how the focus on racial equity and on encouraging and involving youth perspective isn't just the right thing to do, but we believe will improve the information that we collect. We'll get higher quality data. It'll make our interpretation of the findings more sound and lead us to better conclusions about action steps, resources, and investments, and where they should be, where we should be spending our time. If the comm people could, whoops. Sorry, there's a lag in the slide. Great. Thank you for whoever helped on the slide piece. The second takeaway is really encouraging all of you. So many people on this webinar were excited about all of the different roles you have to break down silos. So youth don't experience these domains in the nice, neat categories that we presented. So economic stability and health and psychological safety and sense of purpose are all experienced in a holistic manner. And your programs, even if nominally focused on one domain, most likely they both affect other domains and are affected by other domains. So thinking about that in your work would be great. And then finally, I think you saw from new ideas that Amelia mentioned about health. Hannah talked about the new pieces in economic stability, and you saw on Juan's results from his young people, sort of the creative ideas beyond the traditional indicators that we're used to seeing. And we need to be really open to hearing new voices and thinking in new ways, even if the data doesn't exist yet, and not keep ourselves hemmed in by just existing data sources. The next couple of slides, we have some suggested action items for your own efforts. One is to, connected to that silos question, consider what domains you already are including in your work. Are there ones that you haven't included before that you could, either on whether this is on the measurement of baseline or asking people's input on the program design, or on measuring on the outcomes of how your programs are making a difference. Next, as you've seen in themes throughout all of us speaking, just reflect on who is defining youth well-being, whether it's in programs or research or policy, and think about the participatory research is amazing and sort of the gold standard, but you could also involve youth already in a project in motion and interpreting the data and coming up with what are the implications of the data for policy and practice. So there's ways, we really encourage ways to encourage people to think of small ways to get started if you aren't already involving youth in your work and if the full participatory model isn't possible for you. And we do try to remind ourselves every day that we are coming in with biases and identities and our own experiences that help to shade how we think about different indicators. And this could be countered by either your own education about different cultural ideas or having an advisory group or involving other people from other different racial and ethnic groups to review your work and just to double check and check your assumptions as you're going along. Just a couple more. So I think Flo mentioned that she's a data nerd and we are researchers and also love to dig into all those data sources. There's, I think, more than 100 in the data catalog. But we also know we need to be thoughtful about how we use them, looking at them critically, both to interpret the findings and what those numbers are telling us and see where there are gaps. And we need to add in some of that, for example, lived experience data that Juan mentioned. And our guide offers some questions to get you started, really just as a springboard. I'm sure you have other ways to do that reflection also. And then finally, a request close to my heart for you to get involved in data advocacy. So both for data that you might need for your project, but also beyond that, to promote investment and be a voice for investment in data that covers people of different racial and ethnic groups, that has it broken down by different age groups that we know is important, as well as intersectional identities like disability or sexuality. And this might be encouraging your local school district to publish disaggregated absenteeism rates, trying to connect with your state about what kind of, how detailed their racial and ethnic categories are. Are they, for example, just lumping all the Asian groups together, up to the federal data sources and paying attention to federal registers as the federal agencies think about adjusting their big, large surveys, those questions, and how they are conducting them. So that's the end of our formal presentation. A note, I think that Flo, Kimberly said this, that we'd love to hear how you're using these materials and which parts you're finding useful and could be updated and where you want to see more deeper work. I have a general email here that you can reach all of us at once you have a chance to look over all of the publications. So I'm going to turn off the slides, or someone will turn off the slides, and I will ask Hannah and Amelia and Juan to come back on video. If you have, I should have done prompting. If you have questions or even just a comment or something you don't see in our domains, please enter them in the Q&A box. And we will get started with the couple that we already have. So I will start with Hannah. Thank you, John. He mentions that it feels like there's an absence of the word family. For example, the economic domain is really about family income and such. And the word family is not featured in the domain titles. And is there any reason for this? Yeah. Hannah, you want to talk about how we were thinking about that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I know that you are probably not the only person who was wondering that or was surprised by us not putting it in as a domain. But you're right, family is really important to the development of young people. And in our report, family comes up in a number of the different domains. It comes up in economic stability, in social networks and relationships, and in community and belonging. And yeah, we did go back and forth about whether we should include family as an explicit domain and discussed it. And some of the people that we interviewed discussed how not everyone has access to their family or strong relationships with them. So we ultimately decided to not pull it out as a separate domain, but to integrate it into the domains. And we discussed relationships with family a little bit more in depth in the social networks and relationship domain, and wanted to kind of think about these relationships that young people have a little bit more holistically, because there are so many important relationships that they have with peers, with teachers, with, I don't know. So that was our reasoning for not pulling it out and including it as its own domain. And we also cover a broad developmental range from ages 14 to 24, and family can kind of play different roles in income across that range. I know your question specifically mentioned income, but yeah, thank you for that question, for raising that.
Juan, are you want to talk? I don't know if how that concept came up in your conversations in your project.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% came up throughout everything that we did and everything that we touched. I think for us, it wasn't named as an isolated core theme, because it very much is embedded in each one of those core themes, right? You can make the case that each one of those 7 core themes that we name is associated with either family or sense of community and belonging, and where that fits. And so so family isn't named for that purpose, but one of the recommendations from our Native American Alaska Native crew was to think about intergenerational knowledge holding and caretaking, especially when we're talking about rural communities, and how young people often have to move away from the rural community in order to access opportunity. Maintaining those connections takes sometimes not just family, but also community and elders and access to points in between to make sure that those connections are stewarded and fostered forward. So while family isn't necessarily named as a core theme for us, it is very present in everything that we do, and how it shapes up the rest of the dialogue for each one of our cultural affinity groups.
Great. And I will answer one from Kristen. The concepts are all important, but they mix well-being with the factors that affect well-being. For example, income affects well-being. It is not well-being per se, and this confounds the inputs of well-being and the outcomes of well-being. And you're right, we both included sort of narrowly defined well-being outcomes, describing conditions of youth, like their state of their health, but also believed it was important in this review to include both external conditions and structural factors that directly affect those outcomes. I think this is both to provide context, which is really missing in a lot of indicators projects that just have the results with no framing about how you got to those results, especially on ones that are disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So we thought it was important to highlight the need for the field to look beyond sort of individual behaviors, and our discussion of it was a way to support that effort. And Hannah's quick review, I realize now, of economic stability combine those different concepts, but in the report, those categories are discussed separately within each section. I do think, and I'm sure many of the youth experts here on the call, do have sort of their own theory of change of what are the inputs for the actual outcome measure. And Juan, did you find that the mix of sort of factors, is your project more strictly on measuring the youth outcomes, or does it also include sort of the factors and structural pieces?
Yeah, we had a very rich and lively discussion as we're building the tools for them. One of the key questions was who is the tool serving, and where will it focus? And the young people ultimately made the decision to focus on young people primarily, so that the tool will reflect a state of well-being for that young person at that moment in time. But the aggregate will go out to the community level. And then our hope is that we continue to aggregate that data and information up to the systems level, so that we can really start to build a policy agenda that actionalizes how to close the equity gaps between well-being and young people. So for the time being, our tool will focus on young people directly, but the plan in the back end of that, there's an aggregate strategy and plan to make sure that we're informing and reflecting where the community status and where there's some opportunity to synergize around systems change level.
Fantastic. And the next one is also for you, Juan. Could you say more about the piloting or use of the 3 group-specific instruments this year, and what tips or advice do you have is your collective giving as the measurement domains are used and adapted in so many diverse communities?
Yeah, thank you for that
Those
question.
are big questions, I know.
Yeah, such a good question. I could spend a whole other hour just on that. But
We'll have
real
to have you
quick,
back for another
yeah,
one.
right. But yes, the tool is scheduled to come out, versions of the tool. So as you can imagine, each cultural affinity group is approaching this within their own cultural structures. So an example of that I'll share is when we ask young people, how do they define well-being within the context of a month, right? What elements or what activities build well-being or allow them to measure well-being? One young person in Alaska answered that question by saying that the way that they measure well-being is by being able to go to their hunting grounds that have been passed down through generations and generations of the community, so that they can connect with their native ancestry and indigenous knowledge, right? So that's very true for them. So they measure it by how many times they've been able to get to their family cabin in those hunting grounds. For another young leader out in the East Coast in New York, it's about like how many times are they able to get to the basketball court where their whole family has played basketball since they've lived in their community. But at that is this connection of culture and intergenerational legacy and history. And so those are some of the core elements that we're digging into in terms of community self-efficacy and what that means. And so I rambled a little bit, but the pilot tool will be coming out. It'll be staggered. The pilot version of that will be staggered throughout the year, by each cultural affinity group being able to do that. And the aggregate of that will lead us to the end of this year by being able to consolidate one tool and one entry point for any young person in any community to be able to access the tool and then self-define and identify their own culture, so that the right cultural affinity questions show up for them in a cultural context. Tips and advice, I'd say we are one of the biggest tips and advices there is our as an adult, I am guilty of this too. I get addicted to definitions, right? Give me a definition so that I can measure towards that definition. Give me the primary elements and how do I standardize that definition across so that we can move the needle. What I'm finding and what I'm learning through this process and what the young researchers and experts are telling us is that well-being is very dynamic. It is ever changing. If you were to ask the question 50 years ago, it would have been a different answer than it is today. And so to standardize a definition of well-being is a big challenge, but what we can start to do is to look at some of the core elements that build into well-being, so that we can start to strive for the same outcomes on the different end, right? And so there's the core elements that Urban Institute has identified, some of the core themes that we've identified, all feed into a mechanism of well-being. And for the time being, that's where we can focus into with the understanding and the flexibility that this is also, as generations get younger and younger, there's different challenges, different definitions, different and different ways of approaching well-being. And so we have to, I think as an adult, I have to respect that and also embrace it and try to figure out how do we work with that to also support a pathway towards well-being.
Great, thank you. Yes, living with the ambiguity and shifting answers is not in the DNA of researchers usually. So Peggy wanted to know where we consider health, healthcare, insurance in the domains. Hannah, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for that question. We talk about it in the for our project in the physical health section, in the mental and behavioral health section, and then also we talk about insurance and healthcare in the economic stability section. But yeah, this was a huge thing that we thought about, recognizing like the importance of health in our lives, but also that it's controlled by a lot of forces that we don't control ourselves, like how health is socially and structurally determined. And the importance of healthcare and insurance and having a doctor that understands your needs and all of that. But yeah, I will pass it over to Juan to talk about how it's included in the Aspen work.
Yeah, it shows up in a couple of the different themes. Actually, for us, it showed up in financial stability. Having access to healthcare is one core way of like understanding that, and then it shows up in good mental health, one of our other 7 core themes. And the experience of happiness, healing, and joy, and having the ability to recognize and deal with emotions. It takes a lot of support and resources to get to that point, which is also like a pathway towards healthcare and what that means. So yes, we is a very oversimplified. The core themes are very oversimplified, but everyone should know that under each one of those core themes, there is like a subset of questions and cultural ways of knowing that could span, hundreds of questions and ways. And so part of the work that we're doing is to consolidate to some of the quick points that are cross-cutting and that can really do some silo breaking across cultures that we can approach together.
Great. And a last question, I'll take the moderator's prerogative. Mark asks if there's national surveys that could be promising candidates for adding questions on indicators. I think there are. For example, the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey is a good one that asks a lot of questions that tends on the negative side often and has a lot of assumptions tied into it. Our NNIP partners are participating in a really interesting experiment with the CDC Foundation to test for the regular adult behavioral risk survey, the questions on experiencing racial discrimination and bringing that out to focus groups to regular people and really testing those out and getting more input into those questions. So both, I think, adding new sections could use some good advocacy and improving the questions that are already there to recognize those assumptions for adults, for the adults and expert researcher PhDs that came up with those questions in the first place, probably. I think we are just about at the end. Is there, I'm peeking at the other, I apologize for those of you who we didn't get to answer your questions. But I'm going to go ahead and thank the audience for spending the hour with you. This also was a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know Juan and think about interconnections. There are links on the webpage to our products, but also to Juan's product page, and I encourage you to go and read their initial report also. So thank you very much. We'd love to hear from you, and the emails are provided in the slides. And we hope you have a good day.
Thank y'all.
Oh, and a plug for the survey that's in the chat right now, if you can. If you'll take just 1 or 2 minutes, that would be a huge help to us. See everyone later.
Thank you.